No. It's been a while since I heard those views expressed. Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Plate. As always, I'm your host, Nick Sakalis, coming to you live from the WGBB studios here in Merrick, New York. And as always, I've got some news going on in the real estate world today. And, one of the things that really got my attention was a article that I was reading on Bloomberg News. It's not new news to me, but it's a little alarming of how substantial the hit has been for landlords after these rent laws were in place. Holding the article right now, that's what I'm reading, and the headline is NYC apartment building sales plunge after new rent law dents values. And that's putting it a little moderately. And one of the things that I'm looking at is, and it's pretty alarming. It says total value of transaction falls 40% to lowest since 2011. I did see a dent, and I did see a dramatic drop over these past few months. Let's say the whole year period in 2019, ever since the rumors came out and actually the rent hit. But 40%, that's pretty significant. And to be at the lowest since 2011, I don't know if everybody remembers 2011, what was going on. We had fire sales happening left and right. We were just getting out of that mortgage crisis, and people were basically getting places at steals left and right. But it's pretty dramatic. Now, the numbers are a little bit skewed because where the values were that had dropped off in 2011 from the previous years were not as high as the levels that we're coming off of now. So in the big picture, the values of the buildings are higher than where they were back in those years. However, that's all based on the rents themselves. So, obviously over the years, a lot of the buildings that were kind of putting into this market share have increased in revenues in rents. The reason why we're seeing these drop off is completely because of the fact that the city has basically halted all future growth on these buildings. And it's a really disturbing and really difficult position to put somebody that's an investor or an entrepreneur or a aspiring landlord to get into when they know they're going to make a purchase of a property that has very little to no growth in the near to long-term future. It's tough. It's really tough. And my heart goes out to a lot of landlords. Now, I am biased, and I'm going to, all disclosure that should be necessary. I am a landlord myself, so I understand that pain. And I definitely feel for it because I'm definitely dealing with some of these stabilized units myself. And I have dealt with a lot of the rent controls as well over the past as well. And it's a difficult position to be put into right now. I'm looking at it from the aspect of where do we have to go now from this point? I feel that we're basically going to be turning into a um, cycle where the landlords that are able to sustain are going to hold on to their buildings, and the ones that bought on pure spec that kind of overpaid based on growth evaluations, and nothing wrong with that. Believing that you're going to be able to grow the value and the revenue of the property or the building, not knowing that city's going to turn around and basically change the laws on you. And that's the worst thing. There's people that literally bought months right before this news hit, and they were basically buying purely on the potential. Now that the potential is gone, they're in a lot of pain, and it's unfortunately, and it went from being the top choice for investors and landlords to purchase in our territories to probably the last right now. It's right, right at industrial right now at the that type of category, and it's tough. It's really tough. Um, I'm looking at the transaction history that shows, and if you take it every year by measure, it was. I'll read exactly word for word what they're saying in the article. By every measure, it was a terrible 2019 for those in business of owning and selling multifamily buildings and properties. The dollar value of purchases across all boroughs fell 40% from prior year to 6.91 billion, to the lowest total in 2011, according to the report by brokerage Aerial Property Advisors. There were 294 multifamily deals, a 36% decline, and the first year with fewer than 300 transactions in records dating to 2010. It's pretty big. And just so you could get a visual of the graph that they put in place over here, it shows the patterns from 2017 to 2018 to 2019, and we're going off of levels mid to high 400s in transactions down to 290, and that's basically what you're looking at. Hopefully everybody that's on Facebook Live actually gets a good vision of, and you can hear it in my voice. I'm trying to stay as calm about it as possible right now, because it's something that can get you really enraged and really irritating and really, quite honestly, pissed off about how this is happening. But what are you going to do right now? This is a battle against the city, and calmer heads, cooler heads usually prevail. So, are there a ton of lawsuits out there right now by groups of landlords against these laws in place? Yes, there are. Are there going to be more? Yes, there are. Is this going to be something that's going to be definitive forever? These laws are in place? Probably not. Will they be revoked and turned back to where they were prior, a year ago? Probably not. Probably something that it's in the middle. They're probably going to claw back a little bit as far as how severe everything has taken place, and never as favorable as they were before. And don't get me wrong, they weren't exactly favorable to start with, but it was an evaluation, and it was a number that was at least looked into by landlords and investors and speculators that were purchasing these properties, at least knowing what the numbers and the percentages that they had to deal with, how to work with those numbers. Once you pull those and basically say you have zero growth, it kills you. It just really kills the entrepreneurial spirit. It kills the whole capitalism idea in this country. Again, I might not be the majority right now as far as how I feel about it, and I'm sure there's a lot more people that are happy about it than not. But here's what's going to happen, and I promise you, and mark my words, if this lingers and lasts for extended periods of time, I promise you, everything has a way of repeat. The history really has a way of repeating itself, and everything's going to go full circle. Okay, mark my words, write it down, and you could call me out on this years down the line. This initially, and it has been initially, a good thing for tenants as far as keeping the rates reduced and not having major escalations going forward. Okay, granted, you can't have everything lopsided one side or the other. You should have some regulations in order to at least protect some people of staying in their homes. I get it. However, when you take away the incentives from landlords to actually throw more money into their investments, into their properties, and improve the properties, and anything that they put in, they will never not get a return or a very dismal return on. This is what happens. Landlords will not spend the excess amounts that would have been spent before in order to improve the properties, and in many ways improving the quality of life for the tenant base that's in those buildings. Get this, like, think about what I'm saying. They're not going to spend anything that doesn't have to be spent. So in other words, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That's going to be the mentality by a lot of landlords, and I guarantee you it's going to spread more and more. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a very large amount of aging rental units out there that are being patched up. They're being, glued together and held together by threads. Band-aids are going to be put on things that are potentially breaking down or potentially might have issues. And at the end of the day, who's that going to hurt? It's going to hurt the tenants more than it will the landlords. Again, for the first small period of time, it will benefit the tenants. Eventually, it will overturn and it will hurt the tenants. It's just the way it is. You can't ask somebody to keep pouring money in. It's like the old saying, keep putting good money into bad. Well, that's basically the mentality and what the city is basically asking landlords to keep doing. The taxes have gone through the roof as far as property taxes are concerned. We still have state tax that's being paid here. There's still city tax being paid here. The cost of living and cost of operating in New York is far more than majority of the places throughout the nation, not to mention the world. So stack it up by limiting the income sources coming in. It's just going to make it more and more difficult. So what's eventually going to happen is you're going to see that it's going to get so bad that the city is going to have to force their own hand again and give incentives back to the landlords. But at that point, it's going to be so far too late where they're going to have to give over the top of incentives to landlords, which are going to get lopsided towards the landlords at that point. And they're going to have the opposite effect happening. So the problem is, I'll be really honest, for some reason or another, the dirty part of politics is you have to kind of put your foot in the sand and step on one side of the line or the other. And what ends up happening because of that is you're always going to hurt one side more than the other excessively. Instead of trying to find a common ground that maybe it's not the best scenario for one side, and maybe it's not the best scenario for the other side, but you know what? For the greater good, it's going to appease both sides enough to be able to operate and continue operating. For some reason, I don't understand why politicians and why these lawmakers can't understand that. Is it that revolutionary of a thought? Is it that radical? Try to make both sides kind of happy. You know, the most of the times I do put a great deal together and make a sale. Both sides of the table are never entirely happy. Sometimes, once the blue moon, that actually happens. But both sides are not entirely happy because they didn't get exactly what they wanted. However, both sides got enough to satisfy them. And that's usually when you have the best type of deal, where both sides had to give something up a little bit, but got more good out of it than bad. So we'll see what happens. So what's happening with the building and apartment building market right now? Okay, so things have gone to a standstill. A lot of things are not selling. They're taking longer to sell. The valuations have gone lower. I've had reductions done, significant reductions done on the sales of buildings that were currently listed prior to the laws that came out. And what's going to happen is a lot of the people that were motivated to sell no longer are going to be motivated to sell, especially the ones that are not imbalanced on their income and expense sheet. The ones that can keep sustaining those buildings and have enough income to cover their expenses, sometimes leave something over, or in some cases just barely cover, are going to say, you know what, I'm not selling, or this is my price. If I get it, I get it. If I'm not, so be it. I'm not going to sell. So I encourage landlords like that not to sell their place if they don't have to. I really do. On the other side, you're going to have a very big group of spec type of investors, landlords that became landlords over the past 3-4 years that bought on inflated potentials on the properties. And again, I don't blame them for buying at those rates because the growth patterns were there. Nobody predicted that somebody was going to pull the cord on the way the system works and completely revolutionize and change the system altogether. Nobody expected that. But it did happen. And you do have a group of investors and landlords that purchase these properties with the sole purpose of renovating them, rehabbing them, putting them, getting them in optimal shape, and possibly take off those stabilization caps that were on them before, or just keep up with the basic increases and be able to keep up with their expenses. Like I said, the property taxes have been going through the roof for the past few years in Brooklyn and Queens, Bronx City, Staten Island. I mean, they've been going through the roof in a very fast clip. And top that off by water and sewer charges just steadily increasing. And anybody that's paying those water and sewer charges down there, no, they're paying. They don't know why they're paying, but they're paying. And for some reason, it's all sewer charges more than water. I don't understand that dynamic. If you ever read a water bill that comes in from DEP, but that's the way it's set up, and it's really becoming very difficult to maintain. Con Ed, electric company is constantly increasing the charges, the gas charges, the oil charge, everything is constantly going up. Not to mention material costs and labor costs have gone up as well. Even something as menial as doing cleanup work, where you could hire out a small crew for minimum wage at one point just to do cleanup work or cleaning around the building, whatever the case is. Even those expenses have gone up. You know, obviously everybody that is in the business world in our areas know that there has been a mandate years ago, or a few years ago, that the minimum wage has to go up and that kind of thing. So that has brought up expenses as well. So expenses continue to increase on a steady pace, and sometimes in a extraordinary pace, but income is becoming stagnant. Well, something's going to have to give. Those people that bought on spec, that were already in the red when they purchased it, and said, I got enough of a budget to be able to withstand and hold out until I could get these places rehabbed and until I could get these vacated units filled in, I could withstand. Little do they know that the laws change, and who knows for how much longer they're going to be able to sustain. And, you know, you have a lot of these landlords, they're not these large outfits, these huge investor groups that purchase it. You have a guy that, or a woman that saved their money, did everything they can, scripted, scraped, for either from the business or from their job, that they got whatever they can to put that down payment down on a building, to start building that nest egg for them, to be able to generate income from rentals for when maybe they retire. It happens all the time. You get people that buy these 6-family, 10-family type of units, and they get in with high separation and leverage on their finances. They buy it with 20-30% down, but the income from those units are barely enough to cover their expenses. If sometimes they have to take money out of their pocket on a monthly basis to cover those expenses. Well, when they don't have that additional income and they're barely making it to cover their mortgage payments, what's going to happen to these people? Basically, what's going to happen is they're going to have to give up at one point, and they're going to start selling these places, and you're going to see fire sales happening on a lot of these buildings. And it's unfortunate and it's sad. And a lot of these landlords are going to have to take a bath on what they just purchased, and hopefully it's only a small financial hit that they take, and it doesn't become more severe where it burdens the rest of their lives. Because a big load of debt like that, or a big loss like that, could affect the rest of your life. It's a very slippery slope and a very dangerous situation. These laws have put a lot of our housing in it, and in the business market and the apartment market. People don't get that. Like, they don't look into how much issues like this affect everything around us. They absolutely affect everything around us. And if you don't believe that's the case, then you're not really looking at it with open mind, and you're being a little bit delusional about it. It's really unfortunate, and it's really sad. And I'm hoping that a resolution comes sooner than later on it. But in the meantime, if you're a bargain hunter, keep your eyes open over the next year or two, because I promise you there's going to be buildings that are going to be a bargain coming up. And if you're somebody that has deep pockets, you're willing to buy these properties now and withstand the low income that they're making, eventually when the laws correct themselves, you're going to look like a genius. And hopefully I'm the guy that sold you that building and telling you and guiding you towards how to do it. Because I promise you, my eyes are going to be open to opportunities out there. I might not be aggressive on buying, but there's going to be opportunities out there. And I know that there's people out there that are very aggressive and still buying. You know, the international money that once was coming into this city is not as strong as it was at one point. You can't rely on that. You can't rely on money coming from overseas and overpaying for buildings. It's not going to happen. Well, we passed that cycle at this point already. I don't know if it will go through another cycle down the line, but at this point, it's dried up. It's flattened. You know, it's a little bit bonkers, to be honest with you. You know, but we'll see what happens. You know, we'll see what happens. I'm wondering, like, if people that are working for a salary, or they're working a wage, we're told that you can never get a increase based on your productivity or based on the additional work and efforts you put in there. You could only make a maximum increase on your wages by 1% or 0.5% point or 0.25% point. How happy would you feel knowing that you're going to work the next 20, 30 years and not get any significant salary increase? It wouldn't make, but all your expenses are going up. How would that make you feel? It wouldn't make you feel very good. It wouldn't make me feel very good either. Take away a lot of my motivation about working harder, and I could guarantee you the same mentality is going to happen with a lot of the landlords as far as working harder to improve their properties and improve their buildings. That's just my dumb opinion. Maybe I'm out of my mind. Maybe I'm that crazy guy that's ranting and raving about how the system's completely screwing up the entire scenario. Maybe I'm that guy. Or maybe I'm that guy that's just looking at it open-minded and trying to understand how this makes any sense and looking at how this is going to improve our situation. It's not. This is actually one of those scenarios where I personally believe it was a ploy, a political ploy to actually get public sympathy, because you have a ton of tenants out there, more tenants than landlords, which means more votes. And maybe it was a sympathy ploy, but the big picture was never explained to the majority of tenants that were supposedly appeased by this. And I promise you, when the quality of life changes and those buildings start to deteriorate one after the other, and not new additions and new construction and that kind of thing in those type of category buildings halts because of these reasons, people are going to look at it, or maybe that crazy guy on the radio wasn't so crazy after all. Maybe. I don't know. It is what it is. As you can tell, I'm really like I said, I'm trying to be reserved about it as possible. I don't want to be that ranting or raving guy to scream on the phone, the radio, and just go berserk about this kind of thing, because that really isn't me. But it is one of those scenarios that really have lit me up. it really has, ruined my day, so to speak, when I read that article. But let's get off that topic and let's jump into something a little bit more, maybe some something a little bit more positive, or a little bit more optimistic, or uh, maybe something that will give everybody a little bit of understanding of what's going on in the market. So, past show, I kind of went back into what my predictions were for the year, and I kind of revised my predictions of the year because at the end of last year, I was really expecting there to be a halt and a more stagnation. And by the way, anything that I'm going to speak about right now has nothing to do with the building market or the apartment building market. That market has its own issues right now, and that is not included in the conversation right now. I'm talking about strictly for residential type of properties right now, single families, that kind of a thing, maybe two families, three families. And you know, like I said, last at the end of the year, I had said we were kind of be budding along and pretty much continuing the same pace, maybe a little bit flat, that kind of thing. But the way the very end of the year ended, going into the beginning of this year, and to this day that we're almost past, we're almost done with January right now. Um, we have a little bit of a positive outlook on how things going. We might be taking a little bit of another jump. I'm not quite sure yet how significant it's going to be, but we might get another jump. And at the very least, if we don't see a little jump in the values, I believe that properties will start to move quicker than they have in the past. Not necessarily the luxury market, because the luxury market is like this, like it's so as far as um, the way it's moving. That's more of a flat kind of situation. It's not going as they're not moving as quickly as more affordable type of homes, uh, and that's not really different from any time in history that we're looking at the luxury market. That's always a market that doesn't go as quickly, but I think there's going to be a little bit more resistance, and it goes back to what I said a little earlier as far as a lot of the international money drying up a little bit. Once you lose that infusion of extra money coming into the country or looking to purchase properties, you take away a portion of the buyer pool, where you're going to have to look where else to make that difference up from. And at this point, there hasn't been some other source that fills in that gap. So you're going to see somewhat of a stagnant, kind of flat kind of a situation where houses not necessarily go down in value, they just don't sell quickly. So you have to take that into consideration. But I was looking actually at some of the other sources as far as what predictions they were making, um, as far as outlooks, and I wanted to see how well they compared against what I was predicting. I was reading on the street, and anybody that has read the street ever online, it's like thestreet.com. It's a really good place for resources, not as biased as some of the other areas that you're looking into. And this one came out in the end of December and gave their predictions. And their number one prediction is that the home sellers will sit 2020 out. Realtor.com predicts residential property inventory to evaporate in 2020. That will make it more challenging for buyers to find a home despite attractive interest rates. So they're predicting the inventory is going to shrink again. And that might happen. Not quite sure yet. And I'm not quite sure that affects all the markets because I still think there's a lot of inventory that hasn't gone up yet, especially if you're looking from the Long Island and Nassau and Suffolk County areas. I think we will see a lot more inventory pop up, and but it might not be legitimate inventory. I think we might be looking at inventory that's more of a testing the market kind of a thing. And I'm getting a lot of those landlords calling me. Oh, I'm still stuck on the landlord. A lot of these homeowners, sellers that are calling me up. Well, my neighbor just sold for this much. I think my house is worth that much. I think my house is worth more than my neighbor's house. I want to put it up for that. I asked them, what's the motivation of you moving? Do you have to move? Are you retiring? Or this? No, but I think the values are high now, and I want to get as much as I can while I still can. So I want to put it up on the market. So if we sell tomorrow, what are you gonna do? I'll figure it out once we get an offer. That's the one key indicator telling you that the person doesn't feel quite confident that it's going to happen because they're just putting it out there to see if they could get usually an outrageous price that they want to put on their home. And then the other part of the conversation happens, well, if it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, no big deal. I could stay here for another 10 years, 20 years. Not a big deal. I think you get a lot more of those hit the market. And the problem with those houses are they kind of dilute and they kind of alter what the real pulse and understanding of the neighborhood and region markets are, because you get an extra amount of inventory that hits place. Because of that inventory that hits, here's a funny thing that a lot of people might not understand. If you have a market where your average house is selling for $500,000 and you have multiple houses that are out there fishing for a price that really does not resonate in the rest of the market, and they're putting them at, let's say, $600,000, which is 20% additional asking than what your average house sells on the place. And usually these houses are no much better than the average house that's on the market, or if they are, the upgrades or differences are not that major to be able to constitute a price that high. So what happens is the other buyers, the other sellers are looking at those prices and starting to say, well, you know what? I'm underpriced. What happens now? They're asking for 600. Why am I asking only for 500? It's hard for them, especially somebody that really doesn't gravitate how the market works. It's hard for them to be able to swallow having a much lower price on the market as their asking price than their competing houses down the street or around the block or wherever the case is. So if they happen to get a price on their house, a full asking price, let's say, of 500, because they're priced right, they say we underpriced the house. I don't want to sell. I want more now. Or maybe they'll even get $5,000 or $10,000 more than asking, which happens. They're gonna say we underpriced the house. Why are we doing this? You advise us wrong. So what happens is they decide to bring up their prices, or list it again at a higher price, or take it off the market altogether. So what does that do when you have all the other houses chasing? It basically brings up all the asking prices, which at the end of the day will alter the sales price. It might not achieve 20% more, but it might achieve 2% or 3% more because of the increase on all the asking prices. So ultimately, because of that artificial inventory that's out there and inventory with inflated prices, it alters the rest of the market that's actually priced appropriately in a way where it causes an increase in sales prices. It's a little bit of a crazy theory that I'm saying, but it's not. If you really think about it, how I'm putting it out, I might not be the most articulate of people to be able to portray it in the right way, but take the basics of what I'm saying and think it through, and you'll see that there's some logic behind what I'm saying. So it's one of those things. So I'm not sure yet if the home sellers will sit out. I might tend to agree that maybe a lot of the legitimate home sellers will sit out. However, I think the inventory won't be affected in a way as they're predicting. Another thing that I'm reading here is millennials will get aggressive about buying houses. Realtor.com also notes that one demographic will be big buyers in 220. Even if inventories are thin, that's the millennials. Apparently, young buyers are eschewing, I've never even heard this word, inner city living and have the sights set on 1,800 square foot homes in the suburbs. So they're moving out to the suburbs and that kind of thing. Again, that doesn't really affect our market much differently. It actually does affect our market a little differently than other markets because New York is always a different beast altogether than the rest of the country or the rest of the world. So, if we're going to be honest. But that's not a big shocker, and that's not a bold prediction, if I'm going to be really honest about it. We know that the millennials are growing as far as the age demographic that they're in and the wealth that they're acquiring, and that they're going to be more aggressive about buying homes. Just the way it is. It's the way years ago it was the baby boomers. That's the generation that we're dealing with as far as the key growing demographic of home purchasers. The housing market will be more competitive. This coming from Redfin. Seattle-based Redfin predicts U.S. housing market will be more competitive in 2020 as the cool down began in the second half of 2018 and comes at an end. I don't necessarily agree with that it will be more competitive. Again, because I'm biased right now. We're living in New York. That could be the case in Alabama or Arkansas or Oklahoma. But I don't know if it will be a much more competitive type of scenario. Possibly, if legitimate inventory gets to a low point where you're going to be getting people to really go crazy about buying houses. I mean, they're using low mortgage rates as a catalyst, and believe me, we're having low mortgage rates, and it's very surprising that they've stayed this low, and it's actually quite good for the market. It's a healthy thing. Reading further, it says low mortgages started to revitalize the market at the end of the summer, but won't see their full impact on demand for the housing until next year, says Redfin chief economist Daryl Fairweather. In 2020, buyers will have fewer homes to choose from than they have in 5 years. But the return of the bidding wars is good news for sellers who may be holding out this year as the market bidding. Wait, hold on. That's what I get for not paying attention to what I'm reading. But the return of bidding wars is a good news. Is good news for sellers who may have been holding out this year as the market stabilized. The competition and faster price growth will tempt homeowners and builders to list their homes, which will improve the balance between supply and demand by the end of the year. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that in these markets, because right now we have a healthy amount of inventory. We got to go through all that inventory before we could see bidding wars coming in. Again, there's some sectors and there's some regions that you see that trend happening, and it has never changed in those areas. But not every single part of New York is hot right now. Another trend they're saying is people are going down south, and Charlotte again is one of the top places where people are migrating to. Next on the list, expect bidding wars, which really is more of the same what they were saying before. Again, don't know if I agree with that. It could be a possibility. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I'm sure if you grab 10 professionals that do business here in New York, 9 out of 10 would tend to agree with me that we may not have those bidding wars. However, the one thing I will say, things just might move a little quicker. It might not be as rabid as it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, even better. But there will be at least a motivation for people to move forward and make those purchases. They might not be paying 10% over asking price on it, and that's what a real bidding war breaks down to, 5-10% over asking. It brings crazy numbers. We're not going to have that kind of a thing, but people will be more motivated, and you might get multiple offers coming in simultaneously on a property, but that doesn't really make a bidding war. Bidding war is when you have a rapid pace offering process where it becomes almost like an auction. During the times where there's bidding wars, and anytime I have a house that I have the bidding war going on, it's almost like I'm the auctioneer. Not much different. I'm sitting there and I'm saying, you give us this offer, are you willing to give us this offer? And this goes on and on and on with every single buyer that comes in. And people are just bidding each other up. What makes a bidding war a real bidding war is when buyers are willing to outbid themselves and their own perceived value of what they were willing to purchase the place in the beginning, and willing to jump it up even more. And an urgency where if they don't get it, they're going to lose it and not find something else in this place. That has not been the case last year. Very clear, because they have other options. And this year, starting this year, and I can't see this really changing until the end of the year, but now after we go through the season again, spring going into the summer, and we see how fast the inventory is going to start moving on, then we'll be able to determine if this is going to take effect not for this year, towards the end of this year, going into next year. So if we're going to get into those bidding war kind of situations, I really don't believe we're going to get into it mid-year. Maybe towards the end of the year going into next year, because we still have to eat up this inventory that exists. Again, either way, I'm happy about it. People are more motivated and have a little bit more urgency about purchasing houses. That means that houses won't be sitting on the market for much longer and that kind of thing. So it's a really good thing. Here's another thing. That's a really odd comment to make that they made, but this is like speaking at both ends of your mouth. They're saying if a recession occurs, housing won't be affected. There's talk of a U.S. Recession next year, although the sentiment is becoming muted after strong economic numbers in December. And if an economic slowdown does occur, the housing market will weather the storm. Yeah, that usually happens initially. But if there's a true recession that hits us, eventually that catches up with the housing market too. So it's kind of a weird thing that they're saying right now. Um, we are in an election year, so it's not that typical for countries to go in recessions during election year. Maybe after the election happens, depending on what the results are. But typically, it's going to be more like business as usual for this year um, until the clear path is drawn and we have a clear winner and we know the regime that's going to be handling this country for the next 4 years and to know how to prepare for that. I'd be actually more like for housing markets, I'd be more concerned looking at politics from a local level than on a federal level, because when you have things like this happen on a local level, they impact you a lot more than what the president does. So I strongly suggest that talks of recessions and how we'll be affected are a little bit um, toned down, because it's a little bit of an odd kind of analysis. But that being said, we're coming at the end of the show. I'm actually going to continue the list next week. Had a lot more to go over, but I got into that rant about the rental law change and how it affected us so far. And you know how it goes when I go on a rant. I lose train of uh, the agenda, and I just go on to that topic and just go on it. But that being said, I'll be here again next week, just like every week, between 6 to 7 on the Real Estate Plate. Until then, have a great night, have a great week, and hopefully you buy and sell lots of property.